So, welcome to another Plant Lab conversation, this time with Fiona Douglas, who we're very excited to talk to today. Plant Lab is brought to you by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage project. It's funded by the COVID Response Strategy Funding Program. It's also, this particular recording is brought to you by Zoom webinar, so we're also very grateful to them. Today we're going to have a chat with Fiona, hear about her involvement and some of her research and practice that's been part of Plant Lab since we started. And we'll be guided by Fiona in terms of sharing her wonderful mahi that's very closely associated with her land. So welcome to you, Fiona. Thank you for coming today. Maybe if we start by you saying a little bit about yourself and introducing you to our general audience.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I'll share a little bit about myself. I actually grew up in Australia, in Adelaide, and spent a lot of my youth wandering around the Adelaide foothills because we live right near the bush, and I had a lot of time to myself. And I think that's where the naturalist in me was born, if not before that, but certainly having the time to observe nature was really, really important to me, and I spend a lot of time outdoors wandering and looking at trees and plants and observing. So what happened for me was a natural kind of progression. After I finished school, I wanted an outside kind of occupation. So I ended up taking on agricultural science and absolutely loved the plant aspect of that, and also the insect aspect of that, the entomology, and the connections really between all of those things. So I did spend, that formative time and after I'd studied working in agricultural fields with viticulture and so on, and I have my dog just here actually sighing, so just so you know, if you hear these strange noises, he's a constant companion. And so I spent quite a lot of time working with people around the agricultural field, as I said, but then I went into teaching and I started doing more in the natural resource management field. Interestingly enough, I'd always had an interest in in art. I'd painted at school, and I think since moving to New Zealand in 1998, what I've discovered is that part of me wanted to be expressed more. And New Zealand's such an amazing place. It's so different from where I had moved from. That the growth is phenomenal here in Northland. If you're not careful, you just get grown over by plants, and that was the shock to me, that I could actually pull up a weed or pull up something, put it somewhere, and it would keep growing, and that was something completely new to me. So amazing different growth factors and different things to notice. The other thing in New Zealand is that it's kind of like the birds and the trees are the thing, and there are lots of insects as well, but there aren't so many of those small animals like you find in Australia, and that is a different thing. So it's actually been a real blessing to be able to kind of see the differences between the places, right? So I've spent a lot of time since then doing community development work and discovering more about how communities work, and that I find is a fascinating kind of inquiry, because that then also leads to how do plants grow together, so there's so many similarities, and then that comes into my artwork, which I'm currently doing more clay work at the moment. So yeah.
Wow, thank you, Fiona. Can you say a little bit about, you're talking about clay work, but maybe give an overview of what your art practice is currently, because it's not just clay, is it? You work in a few different mediums.
Yes. Well, it's actually really whatever shows up that I find is interesting. That's kind of how things go. I think in the last couple of years I really wanted to do a lot more with my hands, so I was painting mainly as my medium, and then I just felt like I really wanted to get utilitarian with my hands. And so I've been making, doing things like cups and so on, that this kind of clay work. And there's more I'll talk about with that, but it's all informed by the research that I do and the observations that I make in the world. It's also been looking at natural dyes and this kind of thing. This on the just getting fascinated by how color moves and fiber, and also doing just really simple stuff with my phone and a little macro with my phone, and taking photographs of the micro world where you may not be able to work out what this thing is, but it's beautiful. It's just the light and the way the colors work. It's super. Yeah.
Mm. So in terms of PlantLab, can you say a little bit about where your research has been situated within this mahi? How is that focused or been particular to this mahi?
Yeah, I think when we first floated the idea of, or when you first talked to me about PlantLab, what I could really see, my inquiry around trees on my property was the thing that first came up. And it's like, I have some sick trees on my place, and some of the big trees, and that really concerns me because I'm starting to see some of this plant loss, big trees dying all over the place. And it was like, well, how can I turn my research into something that may actually help me to help these trees? I'm yet to work that out. I haven't, it's quite an interesting inquiry, and it's led me on to, at the time, was thinking about things like electromagnetic issues, with cell phones, towers, and how energy works and the unseen. And that to me is something we have to be super careful of, because some people can pick it up and others can't. And so when there's people, if people can't actually sense those things, they tend to say, oh, this doesn't exist. And we have to be really careful with that in the world, because we have different sensitivities, and we do need to listen to to everyone who's got these other expertises. That's sort of taken me in a different direction, but I've been doing a lot of research onto how things move and flow, and I've done a lot of research around Victor Schallberger, who was an Austrian in the 1930s, sort of a contemporary of Steiner. They did know each other, but they were incredible people inquiring into things that they had sensitivities around. And I was questioning, how does water get to the top of the tree when we know that physics, the physics we learn at school, Newtonian physics doesn't explain how you get water to the top of the tree. The way that we learn this at uni doesn't explain how it gets so high up. So my research around energy systems and how coils and spirals and positive and negative charges and all those things, how they kind of all come together. So it's a massive field of inquiry. And but basically what comes out of it is this potentiality, when you've got a negative and positive, and you've got this duality that creates this interface that causes something to actually move. So and energy to move from one thing to another and create. So that was my initial inquiry in PlantLab, and it took me into looking at what's the fourth phase of water. That's a very interesting inquiry that a lot of people don't know about, and how clouds form. I ended up looking at that because I discovered that plants and trees, when they open their stomata to let out the gases, etc., they also release bacteria, and those bacteria go out into the sky, into the air, and then they become nucleated, and that helps rain. So it's all connected, all of these things. So these microscopic things even going down to positive and negative charges, you know, and then we're looking at the microbes, and then to the bigger and the bigger and bigger, and how they're all interconnected and really, really important for health of the planet.
Marvelous. Have you got some images to show us of some of the research that you've done or progressed since that point? Or
So more recently, I wanted to capture looking at how, because of this way that energy works, or how water works, and you know, we've got this going up, and the formation of clouds, and then water coming down, and how that important that is. That trees, I wanted to actually know with the morphology on the shape of trees, how does water, when it falls out of the sky, what happens to it on the plants? Really hard to find any information already out there. So really, it's come down to my observation and how things move. And I went out and videoed some. Have we screen sharing at the moment or not?
no?
No. Okay, I'll screen share. I've got. Let's share that. Can you see?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just show you some of the little videos that I took. So after a very heavy rain, I was very interested to see how water would move on the plants.
Mm.
And you can sort of see this lensing occurring. They're just water is gathered in little droplets, and there are different ones, like, so this is a caro, which is a native plant, and it's got a sort of a different leaf. Some of them hold water slightly differently.
You're not screen sharing at the moment.
Oh, aren't I? Okay,
yeah,
all right. Now that's just my, where do we go? There we are. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. And are you able to see that now? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So there's, you can just sort of see here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but a few little drops of rain on there. And see the spiral shape, the rosette shape. And this is a really important aspect of how plants are put together. We're still screen sharing. I wanted to show this one too. I don't know if you can actually see the dripping.
So the water's dripping from, I see, yeah. So
yeah, can you see that? I was wanting to look at the motion of the way the dripping was happening, and it's really actually very hard to kind of work that out, but you can sort of imagine that how important it is actually that the trees slow the water down, because the more slowed it is, the less erosion we get in the ground. And it's really super important that water gets absorbed into the ground to continue the water cycle. And that the quality of water, once it's gone through the ground, is so much different. In fact, we should all really be drinking water that's been aged as it's gone through the ground. One of the issues at the moment with the planet is that we don't have a full water cycle, and it's something that happens actually for those of us that live rurally. We're collecting water off the rainwater, and rainwater is actually not as good for us because it's not aged. So
so I'm going to get you to just unscreen share if you're not, just because the bandwidth, I think I keep getting bandwidth issues through, because you know you're quite in a rural area, which is nice and authentic in terms of the discussion.
I know, we haven't frozen yet, so that's good. We haven't frozen yet. So there is, I'll just show, have I shown you this one yet? I don't think so, but just, I'll show you this one of this, the way that the water is sitting on the tree, on the plants. And so we have this whole it's led me to another question anyway. I've gone off a little bit, but when we get this, see how the water is the sun is shining through the water. I'm wondering whether there is a lensing kind of situation where they're actually gaining more sunlight because they've got this lensing going on. And there's such a strong wind. Actually, I was in quite a strong wind, and these water was just hanging there and staying there because of the way that it was tightly bound together. Excuse me. So yeah. Anyway, that's part of my mahi at the moment is like, well, what's going on then when the water falls out and it drops onto the trees? Do we get a movement that creates sort of the energy and creating more energetic as it then goes into the ground and then feeds the wonderful flora that we have in the soil?
So have you translated this in any way into your artistic process yet? Like perhaps visualized in some way or created some ceramics in response to it?
I have actually. I've been creating. So I've been using spirals, and it's a bit hard to see on there, but I've been working with spirals and the ways to put spirals together. And what's interesting is the way that translates into my work is that clay responds in all sorts of different ways. And I've had a few failures because of the way I've been doing the coils. Then I get these cracks and the integrity of the vessel is no longer there. So it's that in itself is a really interesting inquiry. It's not only the visual of the cosmic spirals kind of thing and how that makes a difference to me, knowing about the energy of the inwards and the outwards spirals, vortexes, that kind of thing, earth energies. I do that, I really, really like the visuals of that. But yeah, it's actually what showed up is that it makes a difference to the integrity of the vessel. And there's also the quality of the water makes a difference. So I've been looking at the different pHs or the different acidity and alkalinity of water, because we're talking about quality of water and how that makes a difference. We've heard about acid rain and how that changes things. There's also pine forests and how, because they create an acid environment, that changes the soil underneath them. And so it's why I've been a strong advocate for us not to have European pines be planted in New Zealand, because of the way that changes the soil. We often get downstream, we get flooding after a pine forest has been cut down when it's got to age. And, it's quite frightening that, people can actually build in an area that maybe is a river valley, but is normally not flooded. But if something upstream, you get a canopy is taken down, and in particular of pine forest, you end up with real problems. So I can also show you a little experiment if you'd like to see.
Yeah, great.
What I've done there. Just open this. Hang on. Yeah, so I've recently been very, very lucky that I have got a machine attached to my water, my tap that I drink, that can change the pH and also can change the structure of the water to more energized. And so I was able to, I can do pH 2.5, which can be used for using as a disinfectant and all sorts of things. But you can see here, so this has got clay in it, this cup, and just seeing the pattern that happened on the inside of the cup. And so we've got water on the top, and then all of the particles have actually dropped to the bottom. So it's not, it's completely like taken that away. I mean, the water's not blending with it. And so then we've got a pH of 7, which is a neutral pH, where it kind of like is sort of semi-blending with the water. and then we've got pH 11.5, which is very alkaline, and you can see that it's completely like dispersed in the water. So when I'm actually working my clay, I'm actually using 11.5, the alkaline water and the acid water, for different purposes, and that changes the way that the particles work together. I just find that super fascinating.
Yeah,
it just showed up the other day as I was doing my work and using these cups and squeezing a sponge, and then I could see that there's quite a distinct difference in how they work. So that was super interesting. Yeah, so that changes the way the particles move together. But yeah, coming back to a few other things, like, you know, when I'm doing my my decoration and so on, and embellishing. So this, you know, you can sort of see that how it's done is I actually do this kind of spiral, cycloid spiral, and then I've got the leaf veins, and so that's influenced, you know, the texture that I've put on this particular cup. So
wow, beautiful.
yeah, I'm really excited because this is a line I'm doing for sacred cacao. So I have a friend who's marketing really beautiful cacao for sacred ceremonies, and it's really important to me that there are great vessels to be able to drink that from. So that's my mahi at the moment, is creating a whole lot of those, and I will be selling them. Well, I'm already taking orders, so it's great. It's got a life of its own, really. And I think people, and because cacao is it's a sacred plant, and it's super interesting to be able to be doing vessels for sacred plants. Yeah. Cool.
And so what else, is there anything else in terms of sort of your plant lab research or process at the moment in terms of your artistic practice or science practice? Anything we haven't covered so far?
I think always I look at scaffolding and community. That's always in an inquiry for me. And there's also, what I mean by scaffolding is how we layer these things so that something just isn't on its own. It's always got something supporting it, I suppose. And that comes into my art practice when I think about how I'm not only in community and how am I working with others, but also how do I build this. I think it's why I like coils so much in the clay process, because it's like, how does one thing inform the next thing, inform the next thing, and that's super cool for me. What else? I think the other thing too is slowing down, observing, remembering that the waste product, so when I maybe create a shape and cut it out, I always like to use the waste product for something as well. And that to me is about life and nature, is that things are always dying and breaking down and then adding to the next layer and to the next life form, I suppose. So I think there's so much super interesting stuff in the bits that we think we're going to discard, and then I'll go to those bits and go, what am I going to make with those? Yeah.
And I guess you haven't mentioned it, but you've had a documentary practice in the past, or some sort of video making, or been involved in that practice. And if I think about creative technology and things, or digital technology, it's often the B shots that you find the gems and things as well. So in terms of art practice, generally, things you think you might just, and also I guess for me, starting something and thinking it's just a test, but actually the test end up being the nicest bit of all the things that you did in that particular run, right? Do you find that as well?
I totally find that. It's kind of when I'm most connected, most free. I think peripheral vision is probably more powerful. Certainly for me, if I'm direct gazing, then I miss a lot of stuff. And so it's when we go, I don't want that, I want that, or, you know, we chuck out, or we put it to the side and then come back to it. it's like, oh, actually that's where the magic is. That's where I love that bit. Yeah, so definitely in my documentary making, it was actually always the case. I'd do my cuts and I'd put all these things to the side, and then I'm going to make my whole thing out of the cuts. So yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon, hey? And just that, because I think what's really important for me is that my work communicates that there is more depth than just the visual. To me, it's got to depict or be able to communicate other dimensions. And I try to, so my practice is to be present when I'm making, and to really be thinking about the outcome, or about the feeling, or about what I want to show up in the world as a bigger picture. And I feel that comes through and that communicates.
So what's next for you, Fiona, in terms of what are the next stages or things that you're interested in doing in terms of your practice or work and so forth?
That's a really good question, Maggie. I'm kind of like taking it moment by moment at the moment. Moment by moment. I have a coaching practice, so that there's energy going into that as well. But and I think what's showing up inside of that is that it's definitely love coaching creatives, because it's like when we get blocked, there's kind of, I can really feel uncomfortable. And so it's about how do we connect back in, how do we get that connection back to our source, and to what is it that brings us joy. And so I know for me, keeping on creating is a really important practice for me while I'm coaching others. So yeah, it's a dual thing at the moment. And it's possible that will also turn into coaching with hands-on, so while people can be creating at the same time. Yeah.
Marvelous. And anything we haven't talked about that you feel is important to share, or to kind of, in terms of closing off, is there anything else that I haven't discussed, or that you want to make sure that people are aware of in terms of you or your practice or your transdisciplinary being?
Yeah, not so much about me, but I think the PlantLab concept is super. It's really important, because I think this is where we're finding all of these connections coming together. We're really not just single entities with one general focus on. I mean, we can't separate ourselves out from all of these things that we're surrounded by. And so by shining the light on the fact that it's transdisciplinary, it's really, really cool. So I just really want to say thank you that Maggie, for you holding the space for this.
Well, thank you, Fiona, for being involved. I mean, certainly in terms of your practice, I think everyone has found it really fascinating and also inspiring. There isn't a single person who hasn't mentioned particularly your work around water. And I think the really interesting thing is that the spiral has come up almost in every single person's research as part of PlantLab. So it's just interesting to work together with different people who are transdisciplinary people to see what the undercurrents are. So we're looking forward to seeing how this evolves in the future. And we wish you very well with your practice. Certainly interested in seeing how those little mugs turn out. I've got my eye on those. And thanks again to the Ministry of Cultural Heritage and to Zoom webinars for supporting us and providing this series of online conversations and seminars, so that they're inclusive and people are able to attend and access this information and go well. Thank you so much, Fiona.
Thank you, Maggie.
Much appreciated.